Our guest today is Matthew Bocchi. Matt Bocchi is a survivor of devastating loss, emotional and psychological trauma, and sexual assault after his father, John, lost his life during the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center. Matt began speaking in front of high school audiences throughout the greater New York City area, delivering a message of hope and perseverance. The awestruck reception that Matt received led him to write his memoir, Sway, which is the first story told by a child of 9/11 victims. Matt is in long-term recovery with plans to continue writing and speaking about inspiration and resilience. Matthew Bocchi, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Good to be here.
So when so many people ask about 9/11, they always start on that day, as if that's the day the universe started. Let's start with your parents. How did they meet? What did they do professionally after they were married? And how many kids did they have?
So my dad and my mom met. My dad actually was working at a law firm. Initially, he wanted to be a lawyer, and he was working in the mailroom. My mom was a secretary, and they met there. Within about 2 years, they were engaged and married. Actually, they got engaged at Windows on the World. And my mom, after they got married and started having kids. She was a homemaker, and my dad worked in finance, and he would go from pretty much one firm to the next, like advancing in his career. But on his passing, he worked at Cantor Fitzgerald, and I am the oldest of four boys.
And for the significance of Windows of the World, which you mentioned, for those of us not in the greater tri-state area, just let our listeners and viewers know what that is or was and where it is.
Yeah, so Windows on the World was on the 106th floor, and I think 107 too, of the North Tower at the World Trade Center. My dad actually worked on the 105th floor, so obviously he would be there all the time. And so it was just pretty eerie in a sense that they got engaged there, and then, he would spend his final moments alive there.
So you were 9 years old on September 11th, 2001. That day was a Tuesday. It was a school day. How'd that morning start? Did you usually see your dad before he left for work? And did you see him that morning?
No, I did not normally see my dad. There were times where I'd be like half awake and I would hear him like walking out. But he left so early in the morning. And so that day, so he actually would get into the city extremely early, work out before going to work. So he would usually get into the city at about like 6 o'clock, 5:30, 6 o'clock. And he actually slept in that day. So he missed his morning workout. He ended up getting to work, I think, at about like closer to 7:30. And that day, I just had started fourth grade. And I just remember vividly how beautiful it was that day. It's something everyone always talks about, right? Like the pilots called it severe clear. That's how blue the sky was. And I just remember like that feeling. It was like, the end of summer feel in the air, but like the start of like fall was coming, but it just had that it was still warm. And shortly after like 9 a.m., my superintendent came to my classroom and basically signaled to my teacher and pointed at me and another kid in my class. My initial thought was like that I was in trouble. And he was like a nice guy, but like you didn't typically get called into his office or called out of a class unless you did something wrong. So I wondered what I did, and he brought me into the hallway. My teachers came to the hallway. He went into the class. So I found that extremely bizarre. First, he's coming to the classroom. I think he's going to take me out of the classroom to bring me to his office, but no, instead he goes in and talks to my classmates. And my teacher was there with we were met in the hall by my brother, the other kid's younger brother, and their teacher. They were both in second grade at the time. And they told the four of us that a plane hit our dad's building. They were evacuating the tower and that he was safe. And that was the only thing I knew at that moment. They brought us to this room that we called the game room. And it was like the room where we would sit and play computer games. And it was typically play games when it was like a half day or like the end of the school year, especially around a holiday. And it was a privilege. Like anyone wanted to go play computer games as a kid, right? So I found it kind of interesting. Like they brought us in there and we were there for like maybe an hour. Eventually they brought us back to our class and our individual classes. And my classmates were looking at me very bizarrely. I found that extremely like concerning in the moment. But then one by one, kids started getting pulled out of school, and my mom decided to keep us in school for the rest of that day.
Was there a point while you're in school that you knew that North Tower had collapsed and that maybe you thought or suspected or maybe knew in your heart that your dad was in all likelihood in the building and not coming home?
I had no idea. I had no idea that the buildings came down. I knew of the plane crash, and honestly, I don't even remember in that time if I knew about the second plane. Um, I might have. I honestly can't really remember. But I knew the only thing I did know for certain was that a plane hit my dad's building, and I imagined it to be like a small plane. I'm not like a plane enthusiast, but I knew what those small planes looked like because they would fly around near my town all the time. Because there was a little small private airport like 10 minutes away. So I envisioned it to be one of those, and I knew how big the World Trade Center was. So I imagined it was a small plane, and there was just no problem. Like, a couple lost lives, maybe obviously in the plane, but nothing more than that. I had no idea it was an airline or anything like that. And honestly, I don't even know what my teachers knew in the moment when they actually told us. Obviously, they knew as the day was going by, like what happened. But yeah, that's all I knew.
As my viewers and listeners know, I've shared my experience on that day. You and I talked last week about me being at Ground Zero, and my office building was across the street, and we overlooked Trinity Church and down Broadway, which is the Canyon of Heroes, where they have the World Series parades and all that
Yeah.
stuff for my beloved Yankees.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing something that sounded like a garbage truck hit a pothole. And the sound here, big New York City garbage truck, a big pothole, just this bang.
Yeah.
And we're like, what the hell is that? And then one of my colleagues a few minutes later looked out the window and he said, I didn't know there was a Yankee parade today. And he saw all this paper flying around, but then we saw it on fire.
Mm-hmm.
And we said, something's not right. And then that's when it hit the news, and the world changed from that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Was your mom or other family members able to speak with your dad before the building collapsed?
Yeah. So that was obviously something I didn't know in the moment. But my dad had called my mom. So leading up to 9/11, my dad had spoken about wanting to quit. He was like emphatic about it. He kept saying it repeatedly, like, I'm not happy. He had this premonition too. And he was like, I want to find my true happiness in life and my true passion in life. He said to her, like, I want to pay down the mortgage and like find what makes me happy. And so the weekend before, same sort of things were being voiced again. And he was saying things that were like really concerning to my mom. Like he was questioning a lot of things in life. I felt like he said to my mom, he was 38. He said how he wanted to be cremated when he died, like just random stuff that like I don't think a lot of people that at that age are really saying. And so he obviously had a bad feeling. So that morning he called her 3 minutes after the plane hit. So at 8:49 a.m. And I know this from looking at the stuff that my mom did keep. She wrote everything down and she kept transcripts of certain things. And I'm glad she did. 3 minutes after, and he said, yes, he's like, Michelle, do you have the TV on? I think a small plane hit the building. And my mom goes, and he said, we think a small plane hit the building. They're trying to evacuate the tower. My mom is going in to say, John, this better not be some sort of sick joke. And as she finishes that sentence, the line cuts out. So she goes into the living room. And her initial thought was, she said that my dad liked to pull pranks. He was a jokester, and like she's thinking he walked out, and he never ever called from his cell phone. So seeing his cell phone number come in was very odd to her. But she turns the channel and sees the news, and she starts freaking out. And she starts calling him, and he was calling her too. And one would pick up the line, and there was nothing but static. The other would pick up, same thing, repeatedly for that like maybe like 5 minutes. And finally, my dad gets through to her one last time, and he says, Michelle, I don't know if you can hear me, but you're the love of my life, and I'll love you forever. And that was the last she spoke to him. And after that first line got cut out, my mom had called my dad's parents. My dad's parents are Italian immigrants and like didn't speak great English, especially my grandmother. She picked up the phone. She told her what happened, and my nonna starts screaming and turns the TV on, sees what's going on. And my uncle, my dad's brother, woke up to that noise. He ran upstairs, saw his mom, my grandmother, pointing at the TV and just showing what was going on, and my uncle ran to the kitchen, started calling my dad, and he says he thinks he called like 50 plus times. Finally, my dad picked up the phone. And my uncle was starting law school that week, and he was also interning downtown, but he took that week off. And so they were getting lunch, which they were 15 years apart, so they weren't super close when they were growing up. And my dad picked up the phone as if it was like a normal day and just simply said hello. And my uncle was like, John, like, get out. And he just said, Tony, I love you. And that was it. And that's the last that we know of anyone who spoke to him that day.
Thank you for sharing that. I can imagine how many times you've had to tell that story.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, your day in school, and there was a special day, air quotes around that, in terms of being able to play video games.
Yeah.
Your mom kept you in school. What was her reason for doing that? Did she need some time to herself to absorb the shock? Was she preparing for the difficult days ahead, telling you?
So after the phone calls, she started making calls herself. So she started calling my grandmother, her mom, her cousins. There's people from family, friends of my dad that were calling her, asking her if they heard from my dad, if they knew what was going on. And I think within a matter of like maybe a half hour, not even, like there was a million people at my house, and they were there throughout the whole day. They would continue to be there for weeks, months on end. So part of it, I think, was trying to protect us from seeing what was going on, in the sense of there was a lot of chaos, like I have a lot of friends, unfortunately, who lost a father or a parent on 9/11. Not a lot of them had those phone calls. Not a lot of them had those goodbyes. And so there was just so much unknown and uncertainty, like there was hotlines that were quickly established, within hours. And so they're calling hospitals. There's people just scattered throughout my house, calling hospitals, calling hotlines, seeing if anyone heard from my dad. And the TV was on, of course. So she didn't want us to see all of that, I don't think. And well, not I think, I know. And then I got home from school later that afternoon, and I saw everything for the first time. So and I was very struck by it. Like, she to this day, she doesn't remember a lot from those like days after, or even in that day, but she remembers that. She remembers me coming in and seeing everything and just my reaction to it all. So I think she knew she was trying to protect us in basically her last way, and her last chance to be able to protect us, because she knew everything was going to change.
So when you saw the footage from that morning, you were struck by the image of someone falling from the building. What question or questions that trigger in your mind, and what goes through a 9-year-old's mind when he sees the image of someone falling to their death and other images from that day, as you're still trying to fathom the loss of your father?
Yeah, well, I should also preface it with so I think growing up, my mom held on to hope that my dad got out. Like, she held on for days. She believed that he got out. So I think she didn't want me to really see that footage, and she knew how I react, and I'm going to tell you how. I couldn't fathom what I was seeing. It's one thing seeing the planes hit. It's one thing seeing the buildings collapsing, because they showed that in the days after repeatedly. That day, and only that day, did they show an image of someone jumping, and I think, or falling. I know for a fact it was on like some live footage when they were showing downtown and everything, but I actually found the clip, and the original clip that I saw, and I couldn't understand why someone was doing that, because I'm thinking, in the clip you see the fire trucks on the bottom of the street, and my thought process was, well, don't they know that someone's coming to save them? Quickly that thought process would shift, and wonder if my dad did that too. I had no idea the severity of what had really occurred. Like, I knew from what I had been told that there was so much time after my dad's building was hit. I'm like thinking he could get out. No one knew that there was no way for them to get out. They're just kind of seeing how bad it was by witnessing people falling to their death. So it was just one of those things that I just couldn't really fully grasp or comprehend.
To that point, when did you, in your words, embark on the journey to determine whether your dad jumped from 105th floor, and why did it matter to you whether he jumped or if he was still in the North Tower when it went down at 10:28 a.m.?
Um, well, I embarked on that journey at the age of 11. Um, I wanted to know because I wanted to have closure. I thought that's what I wanted, really. I think the reality is, like, as a kid, like, kids love their dad, right? Boys love their dad. And I had a really strong relationship with my father. But like, the thing is, as the time went by, I knew little details would be told to me. They were definitely told to me somewhat slowly in the early days after. But knowing more and more, and I'm piecing together, okay, I know this call happened, and now I'm like, well, what happened then? And I started watching these documentaries, and I would see all these families being able to identify their loved one. So I said, maybe I could do the same. Um, and as a matter of wanting to know, I thought maybe in his own way, in its own certain way, if he did do that, maybe it reduced the amount of time that he suffered. Um, or maybe like it was just one less minute that he had to be in that building and like go through all that. And like, I don't know. It wasn't a matter of like, I would look at him differently if he did do it. I just thought it would give me peace of knowing, like, when did he actually die, you know?
And how long did that journey go on? And were there times when you thought you'd found the answer, but then you realized you hadn't?
I mean, the journey went on I'm 30 now. It went on for at least 13 years. And this is after knowing the truth. Um, because I think in some ways, like in the immediate aftermath of going through it and kind of like almost inflicting additional trauma on myself by looking at this stuff, um, I sort of empathize with my dad in a way, in a weird way. I thought that like by living, like watching this occur, watching the plane hit his building, there's only one or two videos of that, seeing the footage as the minutes are going by in that morning to the moment of the building collapsing, I'm thinking I'm living that final moment with him. Something I like held on to. And Yeah, I mean, I found out the truth at about probably, I don't know, 19 years old. Um, I should say I knew the truth then because I did when I was like 10 or 11. I did know, but it wasn't directly told to me, and I also didn't really believe it either. Um, but even as I knew the full answers, knew the whole story, it wasn't enough for me, and I know I still would have wanted more, which I did.
One way you thought you'd found the answer was through an uncle by marriage. What did he tell you, and what was his motivation?
Um, so I would ask my mom, my dad's brother, my uncle Tony, what they thought, if they thought he jumped, and they would tell me no. Every time they would tell me no, but they would also say like why they thought that or why they knew that. My mom wouldn't say, well, it's because I had this phone call with this person who told me what when they went through his autopsy and all this stuff. So this uncle steps in when the rest of my family didn't want to hear about it anymore. And he said to me, yeah, your dad did jump. Reality, he was just doing that to prey on me. He had been grooming me for at least a year and a half prior. Um, and he was successful. He told me that he knew I was looking at this footage every day, and he also knew it was the way to kind of break my last guard down, and it worked.
And how old were you then, and how long did the abuse continue?
So I was 14 when it first happened. It went on and off for about a year, just over a year. Um, a lot of it gets kind of blurry to me, but like maybe a year and a half max. It's not a thing where I would see him every weekend or even every week. Like, there'd be months where I wouldn't see him and stuff. So I would talk to him a lot though. Talk to him about what I was looking at, talk to him about the photos I would see and the videos and stuff. And uh, he knew how vulnerable I was. And he knew that by kind of getting that out of me, like talking to me about that, when he would attempt to do something, like I kind of just would be like shut down. That's the way I've sort of analyzed it, like with therapists and stuff. Like the trauma just like overtook me where like I didn't have the ability to fight off anything, you know. And I believed him. Like I believed that my dad did jump. Like I was like, okay, like hearing those words from him, all it did to me was give me more fuel. And I was thinking to myself, listen, I can find him. I'll find him in one of these photos. Like it may take me years, but I'll find him, you know. So he knew what he was doing, as most predators do.
How old were you when you turned to alcohol and drugs? And was it the sort of recreational use that a lot of kids do, or was there more to it?
Well, 14 years old, I had my first drink of alcohol. Kind of no surprise that it coincides everything that I was going through with my uncle, but I was a drinker, like casual recreational drinker. I was a straight A student in high school. So high school, straight A student, drinking on the weekend with my friends, um, smoking weed. And by my senior year, yeah, it was becoming a little bit more of like a thing where I would do it more excessively when I would drink, but it wasn't a full-on problem. When I got to college, I went to Villanova, and did my first painkiller while I was there. And within a matter of doing that first painkiller, I was driving to, the hood of Philly every day to pick up. I was quickly addicted to opiates and other drugs too. And that went on for about 4.5 years. The hard drugs went on for about 4.5 years.
So you said you drive to, the heart of Philly there to get it. You're a college kid. How'd you find them? You just go to the corner, or there's certain neighborhoods, and how'd you pay for them?
Um, well, okay, so I had a guy from Villanova who was you go to school like Villanova and like kids have access to money. So these guys would just try to rip you off. I like to think that I wasn't scared. So I was like, I don't care about driving to a bad area to go pick up. So he's like, all right, I'm gonna come introduce you to my dealer. I'm like, okay. I go to the dealer and I'm paying now half the price that I was paying on campus. Yeah, I had the ability to just be like, go into class, get out of class, go pick up. And yeah, I met the dealer and I was like, why would I not do this? It's 25 minutes from school, drive there, pick up. And, like the areas I would go to, it would be switched up a lot, but it wasn't the worst areas of Philly. The worst areas that I would go to was when I was out of school. Like when I would be home, I'd go to Newark, I'd go to Harlem, the Bronx. Like that was where I was like, I felt more in danger. But in terms of getting the money, I mean, in college, I was selling drugs, but it didn't, not really that much. Like there was times I would do it, then I'd stop. That was one way I would fuel my habit. The main way was lying to my mom. I had all these schemes that I pulled off in school, like where I would make fake bank statements and show her that I needed money to buy this at school, like a book, a new program for school, like a class. She didn't really, I don't blame her, because you would literally think a professional did some of these photoshops. Like I had all the professional stuff downloaded on my computer. If I showed you one bank statement that was downloaded from my Chase app versus one that I made, you would not tell the difference, So yeah, I just would lie to everyone, manipulate everyone. I would steal from people, like things like that. When I got out of school, the drug dealing continued. Um, then I had access to money by working, but it wasn't enough.
I'm going to just switch gears for a moment here and make it on a little
Yeah.
bit of a lighter side.
Yeah.
You mentioned Villanova. We
Yep.
didn't talk about this before. My listeners and viewers know I'm a Syracuse grad. I bleed orange.
Okay.
We're gonna have some issues here come basketball season.
Yep.
But one thing I saw one of your photos was a letter that you were proud to receive from somebody very famous in the basketball program at Villanova.
Jay
Can you
Wright.
talk us about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I sent Jay Wright a copy of my book. Like I had a family friend of mine, actually was a friend of my dad's. She is in the sports world. She's like, oh, like you gotta send it to Jay. You gotta send it to Jay. I'm like, he's not gonna get it. I did. I just sent it to him, like at school, like at the school. I didn't have his personal address, nothing. I sent it to him, wrote him a little note, and he wrote me back a letter, which I was like stunned to get. And it was just saying like how, that I was doing the actual good thing, the Villanova way. I was like, fine, I'm making a change, and like it's one thing I do take for granted is like I did, or one thing I regret is taking for granted the time I had at Villanova. I have lifelong friends, but like appreciating some of the values of Villanova and like the things that I was really taught. A lot of it correlates with my dad too. And so it's one thing I do kind of regret, but it was nice to get that message and like, hear him saying that he was proud of me and stuff.
But you're definitely appreciating those values now.
Yeah, to say the least.
So back to your addiction, you ended up in rehab.
Mhm.
How many times were you there?
I was in 2 detox facilities within a matter of 3.5 months. And then After that second detox, I continued for about 2 years, and then finally got into another one. And that was my last official detox. So I went to 3 detoxes, 1 rehab, and then 1 sober living. So 5.
And some point along the way, you became suicidal.
Mm.
What kept you going when, as you said, you wanted to end your life every single day?
Well, with addiction and alcoholism, it's a common phrase. It's sick and tired of being sick and tired. Every day, and in the literal sense, I'd wake up every day in withdrawal. Opiate withdrawal doesn't kill you, but it feels like the worst possible flu you've ever had. And there's 2 things that make it go away: another fix or time. And no one wants to wait out that withdrawal. So the easier solution is always the fix. And so I got sick and tired of it. It was the monotonous lifestyle that I was living, trying to figure out how I was going to get more money, who was I going to lie to, who was going to steal from. I just was ashamed of who I had become. Things I thought I'd never do, I did. And but then there was some part of me that deep down like knew it was like the easy way out. Something that my dad would want me to fight to the end, which I did. I mean, getting sober was not easy. It's not an easy thing. I like to say now that my life's become easier, but it's definitely like a daily struggle at times. Maybe not the same way when I first got sober, but yeah, I mean, it was hell for me in the first couple months, like the withdrawals, like detox was terrible. Like the other detoxes I went to, like I wasn't nearly as bad at that point. So it was like a cakewalk, it was like I called it a tune-up, like an oil change. I'd get some meds, feel fine, and then be on my way. This time, like my body was shutting down, and if I didn't make a change, like I would either have died from that, or maybe I would have actually pulled it off myself. But I tapped into that, my father a lot in those moments, and trying to have him give me the answers that I was looking for.
And when did you hit rock bottom?
The date that I really surrendered, was July 22nd, 2015. My sobriety date, July 24th, 2015. But that was the day, July 22nd, that I had this spiritual experience, the sign from my dad. That was that's it moment for me. And I knew I was going to make a change in my life. This was going to be it. Like I knew in my heart that I was going to stay sober once I checked myself into a treatment. Like, I didn't have the desire to keep going with this. But yeah, I had been arrested. I've been in and out of treatment. With that arrest, I was facing jail time, and I failed a drug test, which I had 2 months notice of. And my probation officer told me, literally asked me, she's like, I don't know if this is a sign for help or you generally can't stop. And I said, no, I do really want to stop. And she gave me one last shot. She said, come back in 1 month and you're clean, I'll drop your charges. If not, you're going to go to jail. I said, okay. Went home, called out of work, and no one was home at my house. I was back home with my mom, and I made myself a drink, rolled myself up a joint, and I walked outside, and there it is, getting met with that blue sky, and I started crying hysterically, and I literally said, Dad, please give me a sign. I need help. And when my dad died, my mom was told, like the day after, she said, someone said to her, make sure you look out for the signs. And that night, a fly landed on her railing, on her nightstand. And she took that as my dad. My dad wasn't coming home. But that fly stayed in our house for 6 months after 9/11. And it was just buzzing around all the time. Wouldn't leave. In the winter, wouldn't leave. And throughout the years, we'd always get those visits, and that was it. We'd take that as it being my dad. And so fast forward to July 5th, 2015, I'm leaning on this railing and I'm crying. And in addiction, I didn't cry, and this fly lands on the railing I'm leaning against, and it just like literally stays there. And I'm leaning, looking at it, and it's just like moving around in a circle and stopping, and moving around in this another circle and stopping. And I'm hysterically crying at this point. Pull out my phone and I recorded it, because I just like really wanted to capture that moment. And I put the joint down and I said, you know what, I'm done. walked inside and I called up a treatment center. I said, listen, I am not sober right now. I need a bed tonight. And they said, we can't get you until Friday. I said, okay, fine, I'll take it. And gave them my insurance info, got off the phone, wrote my mom this long, long letter. And I admitted to every single thing that I had done and at that point in 2 years. She had thought I was doing well for 2 years, at least from drugs. And I just admitted to everything. And I said, Mom, I'm going to get help on Friday. And she said, I'm so proud of you. And like, that was it. That was a start for me. That was my rock bottom.
And that path you chose to sobriety, we know is not an easy one.
Yeah.
What's enabled you to stay sober?
I mean, I have to take it one day at a time. It's in some ways a cliche statement, but I really do. And sometimes I have to take it a minute at a time. I do go to a 12-step fellowship. I go to meetings. Prayer and meditation are a big part of my life. I do spiritual readings every morning. And most of all, like, I was told when I got sober, I needed a higher power. And I did not have, I went to Catholic high school, was Catholic, raised Catholic, confirmed and everything. And I was like, I'm not going to pick God. I don't want God in my life. And they said, okay, it doesn't have to be God, just anything but you. I said, okay. And I'm like thinking, I'm like, well, I had this little sign from my dad. So I'm like, I'm going to pick my dad. And so like, that's been the biggest help for me at times, because I get these visits from the fly, I get these moments where I'm like, okay, and with praying, praying to my dad, like I sometimes just do it as if I'm talking to like him, like we're talking now. I don't always get on my knees and pray. Like I sometimes will just like pull myself aside and close my eyes and talk to him. And really, I think one of the other things kind of coinciding that is talking about everything. I'm so open about everything I went through because I do feel like it helps me to get it off my chest. But I also think it helps someone else. Like I can't tell you how many meetings I've been to where like I got up there and talked about the abuse and, like the 9/11 stuff is like one huge part of my life, but there's so much more too. And so many people coming up to me saying like, I went through that too. Never talked about it. I've been sober for 30 years, never talked about it, like, and so like, I do feel like I help people by talking about my struggles that, things I went through and the fact that I've been able to come to, through on the other side of all of it.
How much is recovery from addiction something you just have to do yourself and something that you have to rely on others to get you through it?
It has to start with yourself, like that first time I call it like jammed up. Like my mom saying to me, like, you got to go to detox, I told her I was addicted to painkillers. That was March 2013. I went for another 2+ years of struggling and fighting my way through it, trying to figure it out myself before I surrendered on my own. Along the way, my mom would question all the stuff I was doing. She would try to help me in all these different ways, like connecting me to people, trying to get me into another rehab, which I didn't want to go to, and I'd lie my way out of it. And I was an adult, so technically she couldn't do anything. And at the end of the day, like I had to know in my heart, like this is what I wanted for myself. Like I know if I continue where I was going in the path I was going down, I wouldn't be here today. Like there's no doubt in my mind I wouldn't be here today. I was a few months sober in this detox or in this sober living in New Hampshire. These guys were coming in like telling me, talking about fentanyl. Like when I started getting involved with opiates, like fentanyl was like these patches that these old guys would get, like that was impossible to get. And they were expensive. And like, no, like it's a powder and like everyone's dying from it. I never did it. I mean, like to my knowledge, I never did it. And like pills, when they were fake, they weren't cut with fentanyl. They were cut with filler. Like you wouldn't even get high from it. And I have friends of mine who are like sober telling me, like sober only a couple of years, saying, yeah, I overdosed on a pressed pill. It's like they look like the real thing, but they are not. So you have to want to do it yourself, and you have to want it for yourself. And they say it's not for people who want it or need it, but people who work it, and like, that's it. You got to work it every single day. Some days are easier than others. Some days are tough, but it really is a day at a time. And they say that for a reason.
Is the process of recovering from the horrible effects of sexual abuse different than recovering from an addiction?
Yeah, I definitely correlate that with my addiction too, because that was when I got sober. I was in rehab. I was maybe 3 weeks sober. And I couldn't tell you how many people, I was stunned by how many people raised their hand in this one little group we had where people talked about being abused. I was shocked to see some of the like guys that I was like, oh, this tough guy raising their hand talking about it. Um, and for me it was tough because I wasn't like 6 years old or 7 years old or 8, right? I'd maybe have some like basic recollection of it, but kind of like suppressed it enough. So there was a lot of like, I felt a lot of shame because I was a little bit older, but then I had talked about that and I've been in recovery from that in a sense. Like I was going to a therapist for a long time, like trying to work through it, like doing this trauma therapy and stuff. And like that in and of itself is a totally different thing. It's a totally different world and realm because I mean, for a man, for me, in my experience, like I'm a heterosexual male, to have that happen to you by another man, it challenges you and it in a way can damage you because you question your sexuality and all that stuff that comes with it. So I'm confident in the person I am, but it affected my dating world with women. Like it affected a lot of stuff in my life that I never thought it would. Um, but again, I talk about it and I'm open about it. Like my girlfriend, like she knows everything, she doesn't have to read my book because I tell her everything anyway. So that's it though. At the end of the day, it's like working through it and in a sense, yeah, being in recovery from it, but it does differ from addiction in a way.
And you just mentioned it challenges you. You've had
Yeah.
the sexual abuse that challenges you, obviously the addiction that challenges you. The biggest takeaway for me in terms of who and what you are in your character is resiliency.
Yeah.
How'd you develop the resiliency it took to keep going forward with all that's gone on?
Well, I definitely will credit some of it to my father. Um, but I also think that, that it's so interesting because like people tell me all the time, like that I wish I could be as strong as you, or like they say things along those lines. And I never view myself that way. So you asked me to write, to send you a bio, and like I have one that I wrote for something else a long time ago. And at times, like I read things like that, and I'm like, I don't feel like this. Like I don't view myself like that, but I am that way. And I just think it's just been all the stuff sort of compounded onto one another. Um, and in the moment, like I didn't view it as I was fighting through this. I was fighting through this. Like I pushed through it all. And now I can look back and say I've done it. Whereas, I think we talked about this before, like a lot of people never really fully recovered from 9/11. They never fully recovered from seeing things or losing someone. Like I know plenty of people that just were forever damaged. And not a lot of people always recover from assault or abuse, sexual abuse. And there's so many people that die from alcoholism and addiction. So the fact that I'm here today, I do believe it's for a reason. And so I think that I'm almost doing a disservice to others and myself by not talking about how I've gotten to this point in my life, Um, and I really do believe like talking about our adversities and our struggles and our deepest regrets and the things that challenge us the most, the things that bother us the most, things that maybe we let like kind of define us in a way. They don't have to define us in that negative way, but you can use it as like a positive means for growth, which is how I try to view it now.
There's another turning point in your story in which you're no longer a victim and you bring your abuser to justice. Thank God.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
So I'm slowly but surely like talking about it in the sober house. So I'm in the sober house, it's all men. I had this one guy who was like the macho guy, right? So it was in New Hampshire. Got a lot of guys from like the streets of Boston, like Charlestown, like all those places in this place. This was like a top place, like not money wise, like it was a well-known program that there was a lot of success from it because they really made you like do the work. And so this guy gets up and tells a story in front of a room full of 40 guys. And he's like the tough guy. And he's talking about being abused by his uncle. And I was mind blown that he was doing that. But I was more so mind blown by looking around and seeing no one laughing or snickering or anything like that. And that gave me the strength to start like wanting to talk about it. And I did. But then I got a call from my brother, one of my brothers, who it scared the shit out of me, honestly. It made me really wonder if something was going to happen to him or to my other brother, my youngest brother. I knew nothing happened to my second brother. And I reached out to that uncle and I said, listen, stay away from me and my brothers, or I'm going to do, say what happened. He's like trying to, deny the whole thing, whatever. And thank God, I should preface, thank God nothing did happen to anyone else. And so my sponsor, I started working through the steps. I wrote about 150 people on my list. You talk about, you have to work through this list of people that harmed you or that you harmed. And I leave them off the list. At the last possible minute, last day of doing this work, I tell him, hey, there's someone else I left off. The biggest one, of course. And I talked to him about everything. He's like, okay, you need to block his number, because he was still texting me, and he would it wasn't like trying to text me like, oh, I'm proud of you for getting sober. It's like weird, like perverted stuff. So he tells me, listen, when you go home, I was going home on an amends trip for 4 days. He says, you got to tell your mom. I said, okay. So I leave after my drug test on Monday. So I passed you pass your drug test on Monday. You gotta be back by Friday's drug test. So I leave Monday, get home to New Jersey at like, I don't know, 6 p.m. The whole entire week I'm there, I don't do anything about it. And finally Friday, excuse me. I'm supposed to meet up with my Uncle Tony, my dad's brother. And I meet up with a high school teacher of mine. He tells me everything, or I tell him everything. He tells me, listen, I've known you for years. You got to talk about this with your uncle. So I call my Uncle Tony, tell him everything. And he tells me he's going to meet me at my house and we're going to tell my mom together. And I was 23 at the time. And obviously I was an adult. New Jersey had just changed the statute of limitations. So it was my decision if I wanted to do something about it. And I said, you know what? Yeah, I do want to do something about it. So start the process. And he gets arrested the first time. I couldn't remember my age when it occurred. I couldn't give them a definitive reason why I was 14. So they only charged him with second degree. I go back to New Hampshire. I remember how I was 14 years, like why I knew I was 14 when it happened. They make me fly back home. I tell them the whole story. They arrest him again, this time charge him with first degree. And this process, now this is February of 2016. And we go to June and they keep delaying everything. And finally they tell me, we're going to offer him a plea deal. We'll get 10 to 15 years. I said, okay, that was wrong. The plea deal would only give him 5 to 7 years max. And so they pushed the sentencing from June 2016 to September 2016, September 16th. So like literally 5 days after 9/11. And, I go up in the courtroom, like we had him on a recorded line. I say me and the FBI, because like they had me in a victims unit room. Little kids would be like, like little tiny children chairs. And I got him on a recorded line, admitting to everything. And in my opinion, the prosecutors kind of fumbled the case because he should have been away for 20 plus years. And finally they said, you know what, we're going to do the plea out. They did it. And they only charged, like he was convicted on second degree assault. And it was really up to my performance in the courtroom, and my mom and my Uncle Tony, and we all gave like empowering and very powerful speeches. And the judge sentenced him to 7 years. And he got out in like 4.5. He got out a week before my book came out, ironically enough. And he's been out for now just over 2 years. So I mean, listen, it's one of those things that I knew I needed to do it. But then again, like it was my first year of sobriety. So there's part of me that was like, shoot, I should have taken it to trial. He could have been away for 40 years with all the different counts, but then there's part of me that's like, what, I did what I needed to do and sort of save myself from, inflicting more trauma on myself too, and going through that whole period. And then there's the risk that he gets acquitted. And then what, But yeah, he's a registered sex offender. He's on lifetime probation. So I knew I needed to do it, and I did it. And yeah.
You talked about your book. When did you start writing, and when did you decide to turn your writing into a book?
Started writing at the age of 11, journaling. And then throughout college, in high school, I read a lot of poetry. And then college, I didn't do much creative writing. It was just all college stuff. college essays and all that, or whatever. Um, when I got sober, I started to write again. And as I was going through all this stuff, I started to really like just write out all these experiences. I started speaking at high schools and I wasn't getting paid for it. And when I would get paid for it, it wasn't a lot of money. And they paid me like $100 and like give me lunch to come speak to these kids, And so someone said to me, "You should really write a book." And I was like, I have no idea where to start with that. But I just started writing the stories out, one by one. And so from like during the time of like the sentencing getting pushed out and everything, it was like June 2016. I started writing some stories, and then I finished the first draft in May of 2017. And it took a long time to get it published. I mean, I got my book deal in February of 2020, and then a month later COVID hit. So we didn't know what was going to happen. I was talking to my publisher. They were like, "We don't know what to do yet." Like I said, "Why don't you push it for 2021? It could be a 20th year anniversary." And they said, "No, you know what? We want to publish it for 2020 because of COVID, and it'll be inspirational." I said, "Okay." And I'm honestly glad that they did that, because my book was the first story told by a child in 9/11, and there was more to come in the next year for the 20th anniversary. So I'm glad we did that. But yeah, so that was that process.
So what's the title of the book, and where can our listeners find a copy?
Yeah, sorry. Title is Sway. I actually did just sell out on Amazon. At least the paperback did. You can find it on Amazon. Most Barnes and Nobles have it. A lot of the independent bookstores have it. It's on Audible, Kindle, and anywhere you buy your books, you should be able to find it.
And what about the 9/11 Museum?
It is at the 9/11 Museum as well. Yes, good point.
So, and I think it's the only book there by a child. Well, maybe not if it's the 20th.
It should honestly be. No, I think it is, because they didn't get it in there until about maybe like 6-7 months ago. They vet every single book they put in that museum, and that gift shop is vetted. I sent them the book when it came out, and we went back and forth for over a year trying to get things finalized. So yeah, but it's definitely there.
Well, that's a tremendous accomplishment. Congratulations to that.
Thank you.
So that being said, what's next for you? And as you focus on continuing to write, what's your next project going to be?
Well, I've decided, I'm speaking at schools, organizations, but primarily high schools and colleges right now. Corporate stuff is actually finally coming in, and I'm shifting my story to how they want me to tell it, but really, in terms of a second book, I've been debating doing a sequel. I've been debating doing a prequel. But I've been doing a lot of independent, like freelance stuff, like articles, like sobriety based articles, things like that. But I am debating still, like maybe writing that book proposal and sending it out to publishers and agents again, and seeing what happens. But really, the speaking engagements is really what I find the most passion. I mean, I love to write. I do it so much in my free time anyway. But the speaking is really where I feel like I'm making, I can see the impact I'm making, where someone buys my book, they read it, even if they hate it or they love it, I don't always know, so not everyone leaves a review on every book they write. So, but that's where I see myself going with this.
And if somebody wants you to come speak at their company, their school, their university, where can they find you?
My website, which is a little wordy at times, but it's Matthew John Bocchi, BOCCHI.com.
We'll be sure to put that on our social media platforms as well, so they can reach out to you.
Thank you.
The loss of a loved one under traumatic circumstances, whether an accident or murder, often traps the survivors in a cycle of how they died rather than how they lived. What have you learned about remembering your dad for how he lived instead of focusing on his death of that tragic day?
My dad was 38. He lived life to the fullest. He accomplished the things he wanted to accomplish. And he did it in a short period of time. And I mean, his legacy lives on through myself and my brothers. And I think I said this to you too. Like, I feel like he would be disappointed in the fact that I focused on his death for so long, not his life, because he would want to be remembered by the life he lived, and the fact that that we're all here, like his whole family's still here, like, and they keep his name alive and his legacy alive. And I think it's important, because we sometimes kind of focus too much on the actual loss rather than like the life that they really lived. And that's how I try to live my life today. and especially when I think about him and his death.
We have just a few minutes left in our conversation. What parting advice do you have for our audience, especially those who are going through the hell of addiction or coping with a crushing loss, so they can persevere through adversity and come out the other side?
When it comes to addiction, don't ever give up, and when you know it in your heart and you know you have a problem, just take that first step, pick up that phone and make that first call and start making that change, because I'll tell you, like, as painful as you may think it is, and as hard of a road as it is, it does get better. And the life I live today and lead today is certainly a testament to my sobriety. I would not have any of the things in my life that I do if I was not sober. I know that for a fact. In terms of a loss, I mean, my dad died 21 years ago. And the craziest thing is, I think it took me, for the book coming out, to view his death and that day as a way to celebrate his life. It's impossible to escape 9/11. It's impossible to escape the footage and all that stuff. But this year, I think honestly was the first time I didn't see anything on that day. I didn't look at the TV once. I didn't look at my phone, nothing. And I tell you, man, like, it didn't even feel like 9/11 that day. It felt like just another day. Besides all the people texting me, and they say, and it's amazing getting those texts, and it's so nice and everything. But it's also so nice to just kind of be there with my family. And that's what we did. Like, I was with my whole dad's family, my family, and we celebrated him and talked and told stories about him. And that's how he'd want to be remembered. And that's how I think all of our loved ones want to be remembered, not by their death. Tragic, not tragic. It's always painful. So.
And again, the title of the book is Sway. You can find it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other independent booksellers. And also the website to have Matt come in and speak is Matthew John Bocchi, BOCCHI.com. Matthew Bocchi, author of Sway. You have a heartbreaking and yet inspiring story of resilience and survival in the most difficult circumstances. I really want to thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Chris. It means a lot.
No, the pleasure and honor was mine. I truly appreciate it. I'm Chris Meek. For more details about upcoming shows and guests, please follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/Chris Meek Public Figure, and on Twitter at @ChrisMeek_USA. We'll be back next Tuesday, same time, same place, with another leader from the world of business, politics, public policy, sports, or entertainment. Until then, stay safe and keep taking your next steps forward.